Hi, I'm John Gilmovich from Real Property Manager.
Hi, I'm Ken from Avvora Finance.
And I'm Debra Beck-Mewing from the Property Frontline. You're with Property Mythbusters. We're here to bust myths around the property buying space. And today we're talking about the myth that asking prices are a true representation of property value. And I'm kicking off the conversation today because this is a problem that I see a lot of our buyers struggle with. A lot of people come to us thinking that they have a negotiation problem when really they're just not getting their pricing right when they're assessing properties. And it is very tricky to get it right. But if you use a couple of good strategies, you can at least save a lot of time. So just to set the scene, we need to talk about new as opposed to existing property. New property, we don't really have much of a chance to actually do too much negotiation on, but for investors, I'd be advising them to steer clear of new property because it's currently really, really overloaded because of the government grants. Not sure if anybody else wants to kick in there at all. Surprise!
There are certainly a lot of grants available to get access.
Yeah.
I guess we'll push.
So what we're seeing is that land is being overloaded and overpriced because the developers have an opportunity to absorb the grants because now buyers have got a little bit more leeway. But anyway, so if it was me, I would be leaving the new property to people who want to buy new property as a home. But of course, I would never buy a new property anyway, but that's beside the point. Now, in relation to existing property, what we advise people to do is really take a step back and get some good comparables before they actually believe the price guide that they might be getting from an agent. Now, of course, it depends on what state you buy in. In Queensland, you don't get any price guides because that's the law up there, but you can still ask the agent for some recent sales to compare the existing property, that your target property with. And in other states, we'll typically find that agents will, for want of a better description, they'll use bait pricing, or they'll lower the asking price or the price guide to attract more people to the property. And then they get more interest in the property, the price is then driven up, and hopefully by that time the vendor's target price is met by the buyer. But when you're in a hot market, looking at comparables, and I'll talk about how to get them in a second, I always advise people to have a buffer of around about 10 to 20% over an asking price, because then if you can still afford to buy a property with an asking price and the 20% buffer, you've got a much better chance of actually being able to acquire it. Of course, if the market is cool, then you can sort of go to the lower end of a range. And in relation to getting comparables, my little tip there is make sure you not only look at the prices, the asking prices of other similar properties as the one that you're interested in, but also look at recent sales. And you can find them pretty easy on either realestate.com.au or Domain.
Debra, in your buying experience inside, let's say, the inner markets, how accurate have you seen the price guides being to the end result, say during an auction campaign? Is the agents really giving the right range, or is the agent really just, you know, creating that honey to the bee just to get interest in the property?
Well,
Get people to come to the
yeah,
auction?
it really, once again, depends on the area and the type of property you're buying. But if we're talking about residential property in our main cities in Australia, I'd say that, well, that agents are, while they're not breaking the rules about really giving a very low guide price, they certainly put the asking price towards the lower end. And this is what, you know, trips up so many people, and they waste so much time on assessing property, or, you know, buying the building and pest inspection, and, you know, investing time to assess that. Then they turn up at auction and immediately they're out of the ballpark. So you just really need to make sure that you've got that buffer and accept that that asking price is probably at the lower end. But the other thing to think about, and this is something else that trips people up about price, is that even after you've got your agreement on the price, so whether you've done it by private treaty or bought by auction, after that, there's no guarantee that the bank will agree that the price you've offered actually is true property value. And so here I can handball over to Ken. What's your experience with this kind of situation, Ken?
Yeah. So I guess firstly with the valuations, the banks generally have a policy where the valuation, they'll take the lower of the two, so your contract price.
So what was that? You sort of went blurry.
Yeah, so normally the banks would use, they have a policy where they'll use the lower of one of two prices: the contract price that you sign on, or the valuation that it comes back in. Back at. When the banks get valuations on properties, they have a panel of valuers who go out, inspect the property. There's certain criteria that the valuers are viewing the property from. So they might have, because the bank wants to know the value, mainly because if things don't go well in terms of the loan repayment, things like that, and they have to repossess the property, they need to make sure that they can sell it for the amount to cover the debt. Sometimes that always doesn't happen, but they want to reduce the chance of that happening. So yeah, they get the valuation, and it may be a little bit more conservative than the actual current market price, if that makes sense, especially if, you know, the market's pretty hot and there's a lot of increases that, you know, that are happening, and the valuer has a situation where they're trying to use historic data to kind of price what the property's worth,
where the property's heading.
And then they can't really anticipate, you know, or so how much they can forecast. I don't know, you know, because I mean they've got to make sure that when they if things go bad and the valuation kind of stacks, the property doesn't sell for them that they said it would. You know, they've got to be able to substantiate why they valued for that amount. So yeah, valuations can be tricky, and the amount that you pay for the property can play a factor, because if you're buying it well above, let's just say you love the property and it's just something that you just want to have, you're not really too fussed about the price, but you are relying on a home loan, it could still play a factor in terms of whether you are able to secure that property, even though you're willing to pay an extra, you know, 20, 30, 40,000, however much that might be. So one thing that, so what would happen is if the valuation came back less than the contract, that's when you might find yourself getting stuck with the approval of the loan, especially if you're closer to the, you know, critical thresholds like, you know, maximum LVR, so 90% or 95%, because a slight dip in the valuation will mean that you'll have to come up with a shortfall, especially if you're borrowing to the max. The other thing is if you're trying to keep it at 80% and not wanting to pay lender's mortgage insurance, the slight valuation that comes back lower than your contract price will mean that the LVR, or loan to value ratio, will increase, be in my territory. So yeah, those are things that that you probably should kind of take into consideration. And we're mentioning, Deb, about the difference between pre-approval and the actual process to have the property valued. So one thing to note is that your pre-approvals aren't a guarantee that you're going to secure the loan. Still recommended to get a pre-approval because the lender, depending on how the lender assesses your application, but basically they vet some of the parameters of your application. So your financial position, your income, things like that. So it just increases the likelihood of, decreases the likelihood of something cropping up being an issue with the lender to approve the loan. So they've looked at your financials, savings, and things like that, and they're okay with it. The next step then, once you actually found the property, is to do a valuation on the property and make sure that the lender's comfortable with that security. Some instances might be rural areas, the size of the land.
And the size of the unit. Yeah,
the size of the unit. Some units are quite small. 40 square meters in the city, CBD areas. So lenders may not be comfortable, even though you can support that loan, let's just say, or twice that amount. There are specific criteria, postcode restrictions even, been working on recently. Port Macquarie, the most competitive lender that was on panel, would only go up to 80%.
Yeah. What is it with Port Macquarie at the moment? Anyway.
Yeah.
Go on.
So these are the type of things that they, even if you had, very good, strong cash flow, secure jobs and things like that, the security would hold back the approval of the application or prevent it from being approved. So yeah, one thing to note when you are going in, you've got your pre-approval, it does help in terms of having your financials checked, but the bank still needs to take the home loan as a whole and assess the security, the value of the property, and make sure that that's okay with them. Sometimes specific items, not necessarily easements, but like carriageways and things like that.
Yeah.
Close to those big, electric
transmission lines.
Yeah, transmission lines. That could be, a factor that the lenders don't want to kind of lend for, or may have LVR caps. So there are a whole bunch of things that could go up, but basically valuations and the price going back to, the price, the asking price is a good guide for prices. The banks take it slightly different on value of property, which should be taken into consideration if you're requiring, a loan to kind of complete the transaction. So.
Yep. Okay. That sounds great. And John, what's your view on this topic?
Yeah. So for the rental market, price guides in the rental space haven't really been they've been around, but it hasn't been a big thing inside of rental property, because rental property is generally seen as a kind of a classified ad, right?
Yeah.
You've got the asset, and you've got an asking price, and basically you apply based on that if you see value or not. And most tenants will be trolling through comparables and pinning like for like searches, 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 1-car space searches in a particular suburb. But markets change. That's when markets are good, but markets change, and the rental market during COVID has been pretty tough, as we know, and continues to be. So things are becoming more competitive, and I'm seeing more and more price guides or price ranges for rental properties being offered. So it could be a situation where you kind of got this lower end of the range for let's say an inner west Bay Sydney 2-bedroom apartment, 580 through to 620 per week. Now, what does that mean for anyone? That can be confusing. But what the agents are doing is, in fact, gauging interest if, let's say, someone is in a price range under $600 per week. So they want to capture the sort of the $450 to $600 per week budget tenant, but they also want to capture someone into the into the early 60s, where possibly that's the true value of that rental property. But because inquiries are so low at the moment, there's just, lack of demand because of all the immigration factors and job security and all those things that go on. They want people showing up. They want tenants showing up to the open homes. So they have this rental range basically to entice interest, get them to the open home, and then get them to apply for the property. And most, of course, will apply at the lower range because they've actually given that window. 580 to 620 or 540 to 600. But then what they start doing is discussing terms with the tenants. So they'll have a look at their applications and then gauge, okay, well, when is the likelihood of you actually moving into the property? Is it next week? Is it right now? Is it 4 weeks down the track? And also potentially, well, how long do you want to lock into a lease for? Is it short term, 3-6 months? Or is it longer term, 6 to 12 months, or possibly longer? So based on all these factors, they start negotiating between the landlord and the tenant the best possible outcome and the rental price that the landlord is willing to take based on those terms and the variables that occur in that. Now that's really tricky, Debra. That's really tricky to do, but and it's not a method that I personally use when I advertise properties. I just think it's just too much work, too many variables, and no real sense of certainty for prospective tenants. I think tenants just want to know, what the price is. That's the max. Properties available to move in and such date, and they don't want to go into these long negotiations back and forth. At the end of the day, you just want that convenience of just applying for a rental property, your application being accepted, and then you move on into a tenancy agreement. But yes, they're out there. Price guides for rental properties are out there, and it's definitely not the final price that you'll be paying. It's a negotiation process. That will be the outcome to the final price. Touching on another thing that can occur in these situations, especially with price guides, is that you can get pinned into a rental auction. Now, rental auctions are not really what we know the traditional property auction to be, where a whole bunch of people gather around a property. There's an auctioneer with a gavel, and they're actually bidding for the final outcome of who that tenant is. Now, that'd be really silly because ultimately the winner of an auction like that may not be an actual qualified tenant to move into that property as well. So that would be a silly strategy. However, rental auctions are really like a Dutch auction. So, for example, you may have several tenants coming in to inspect the property. They are very, very interested, and based on demand, they might feel like paying over and above an asking price. And so the agent may receive an application which is over and above the actual asking price or the price guide. And then what happens there is, of course, the agent's working in the best interest of the landlord. So they have to present that offer. And if they're doing the right thing, they have to also tell the other potential applicants that there is a higher offer on the table than the asking price. And so they may get all pinned together with this kind of Dutch auction situation until really the final outcome. And, price is always a motive for landlords to accept tenants, but it's actually not the final decision. The quality of the applicant just plays just as an important role as the price as well. So now, rental auctions are not illegal. They generally don't go on, especially in markets in down markets like this, in hot markets, they can occur where tenants are in abundance and supply is not. So, you know, if you looking back a few years, that was actually going on. It was a thing.
Yeah, I remember.
Tenants were offering over and above. There were queues outside of properties, tenants lining up out onto the street, and several applications being lodged and offers being lodged.
That was only a couple of years ago.
Only a couple of years ago, Deborah, and how things have changed. So they are not illegal, and that's because the final price negotiated is in the best interests of the landlord and the agents there to represent the landlord for the highest outcome and the best outcome for them. So yeah, there it is. That's the price guides on rental properties, and how to navigate your way through a potential rental auction situation.
Yep. Okay. Alrighty. So I guess that's it. And so, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah. So thanks for joining us again at Property Mythbusters, and reach out to us if you have any topics of interest you want us to cover, and any myths you want us to debunk. And you can find us on our Facebook page at Property Mythbusters, and also reach out to us personally via email or our own websites. That's John Gilmovich at Real Property Manager, Debra Beck-Mewing at Property Frontline, and Ken Hugh at Avvora Finance. That's where you'll find us, and we hope to see you again at the next session. And take care.
Okay.
Yes.